Hello and welcome to the Upon Further Review podcast brought to you by Field Street Baptist Church. On this podcast, your host Cody Kitchen sits across the table from Dr. John Hall as he reviews his Sunday sermon from the week before.
Welcome to Upon Further Review podcast. I'm your host, as always, Cody, and joined with me is my friend, Dr. John Hall.
Thank you, Cody. It's always a joy to spend a little time with you doing this podcast.
Yes, it's an exciting time, and we are continuing in the Gospel of Luke with the title of the message, You're Fired. And Luke chapter 16, verse 1 through 18. So, John, as you prepared this message, what are some things that came to mind?
Right away, when you examine this text, you come to the conclusion it's pretty odd. For one thing, there's not a single righteous, noteworthy character in this particular parable. And then you have the challenge as the preacher to accurately interpret and apply the text and help the listener apply the text. So for me, it was a challenge. If I'd have had my way, I'd have just leapfrogged over it, but you can't do that.
No, and you do it well.
Well, thank you.
Not leapfrogging, and it was interesting, and I'm sure from your side it was a whole different dynamic. So the sermon text from Sunday morning is known, as you told us, as the parable of the unjust steward. And you start your sermon with pointing to Jesus, identifying the pressing problem, and then you identify in verse 1 through 3 that there's a wealthy man who has employed a manager to steward his wealth, and we find out that the manager is wasting his possessions, so this manager fires him. And I'm sorry that this was the first thing that came to mind, but the title of the message just reminded me of Donald Trump, his show,
oh boy,
whatever that was called.
The Apprentice.
The Apprentice,
yeah.
Yes, you're fired.
You're fired.
And you tell us that the manager held him accountable for his management. But you then direct us to see that the steward questions what his next steps will be. Accountability is something that is lacked in our culture today, but something that is apparent in the story, and that's something that just was highlighted as you were speaking on Sunday, and it may seem like an obvious answer, but I think it's worth asking, is what makes accountability so important in general?
Great question. My one-word answer is motivation. Motivation. I think, and I do not mean this disrespectful to any person, but I think if we are all honest, there's just a large segment of people who are not self-motivated. So it's helpful if someone holds them to account. I'm held accountable in my marriage, in my relationships with my children. I'm held accountable by the church, specifically the personnel committee, but more importantly, Christ. So knowing that one day I will answer to Christ for the stewardship of the ministry he's entrusted to me is very motivating. And it's more motivating than any of the other factors I've just mentioned. And so I think, if nothing else, knowing that we're going to be held accountable for our stewardship is a very motivating factor. And we all need to be reminded, if we are disciples of Christ, that we are going to answer to him one day. There will be an accounting of the stewardship of the grace we've been shown. And frankly, that should be motivating all of us. It's a very sobering text because our lives are under the careful and watchful eye of Christ. I think that's a great thing, actually.
Absolutely.
Maybe a little unsettling, but for those who think their lives are largely unnoticed by us, by others, just not true. Where the Lord is concerned, he knows and sees everything, and it all adds up in the kingdom economy. So I think, if nothing else, knowing that we are accountable to Christ should sure motivate us to live our lives in obedience.
Yeah, that's good. And I think I think, and I'm not saying you're saying this by any means, but I do think at the same time that, and I'll say it because it's my culture or my generation, but I think too this younger generation we've come into a place of complacency, and I appreciated what you said on Sunday because it's a reminder, not only as a pastor, because I think that, and as a minister we have, of course it's accountability, but even as a Christian we're told, and you made that comment on Sunday, that as disciples of Christ we are held accountable. And I think that's a good reminder because I think our younger generation hasn't heard that as much as they should. And I don't think that's anybody's problem or anyone's fault, or they have heard it and it just went through one ear out the other.
Yeah.
It's very possible.
Sure.
But I just think that too, it's such a good reminder that I don't know if, and I'm not hitting at churches in general, I just don't think it's talked about enough. We're not holding the accountability I think that was once there. We're letting a lot of things slide in our culture today, and not just the church, just in general, overall.
Right.
And so I'm saying all this to say I think it's refreshing to, one, that you talked about accountability and even this parable, but I think there's a lot of the younger generation who honestly have never heard this parable, and I think it was a wake-up call for them to understand I am going to be held accountable.
Right.
And it's not just the quote-unquote pastor that's going to be held accountable.
Correct.
But
we're all going to be held account. Another thing
Right.
about it, if I may interrupt you, I think all of us are probably by nature resistant to accountability, to giving an account of our actions, our performance.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
So I think there's a tendency to kind of bristle when that idea, that word, and then the actual, the outflow of when it happens, being held accountable. I jokingly talked about in the sermon my wife holding me accountable for some of my expenditures of our income. Now, she does it lovingly, but, it helps me knowing that one night in my living room, she's going to start asking questions about what'd you buy there? Why'd you get that? There's nothing wrong with that, but
Sure.
sometimes I have either not purchased something or said, well, maybe I'll get something cheaper, or maybe I'll wait, because I know I'm going to have to answer to my wife.
That's funny. If Beth is listening to this, she can blame Michael and I for some of those breakfast burritos.
Yeah.
I'll take blame. Well, in verse 4 through 7, we see that this plan comes into action. And the manager decides that he's going to give large discounts to his manager's debtors where they would agree to pay less. And you point out that he does this so that they would be obligated to take him into their homes. And as you said on Sunday, I'm sure that this made the ones who were in debt very happy. It would make me happy, for sure. And before you proceeded with the story, you gave us 4 things that made a good steward. And real quickly, just as a reminder, you said number 1 was that he must look out for the future. The second was that he never lives beyond his needs. The third was he invests and carefully manages what's entrusted to him. And the fourth is he understands that he's accountable to the one who owns it. And I list all those out because I think it's important. You say, quote, you and I are accountable to God for the stewardship of what he has entrusted to us. Our time, talent, resources, relationships, skills, everything. So this made me think, as Christians, we should take these practical applications of being good stewards, which then makes my question is, what does it look like to be good stewards and be held accountable to all that God has given each of us?
That's a great question, and my answer may not be practical enough for what you're asking, but I think it largely begins with a certain mindset and perspective. And when your mindset is what I have really belongs to someone else, you're less likely to squander it, waste it, blow it. And for the Christian, it's so clear in Scripture that everything we have is God's, that it ultimately belongs to Him, everything. Now, we have an American mindset that we have to overcome, thinking, all of us were self-made. We pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps, and I have what I have because I worked hard and I earned it. not discounting all that, but ultimately for the believer, it's God who has given you these things. It's God who's given you your marriage, your family, your home, your material blessings, your talents, your skills, your time, everything. And so when we discipline our thinking to align with the Bible and the Bible's teaching that we are managers and stewards of what belongs to someone else, to me, that's the biggest step. That's the biggest hurdle that you have to get to, is looking at it differently than the world looks at your stuff. Then you can get to the practical things of, how am I going to manage my income? How am I going to manage my time? How will I steward the relationships within my home, my friendships? And when you start looking at it that way through the disciples' eyes, it will change where your priorities are, more than likely, how you spend your money, on what, how you expend your time. I use my time so differently than I did when I was a younger man. And all of us go through those phases and seasons of change where we change how we steward our time. Or, when I was a younger man, my money went to this. Now that I'm in my mid-50s, it's going here. So I think it starts with a mindset that this isn't mine, this is the Lord's, and how can I use this in a way that would please Him, to the extent where He may even be pleased to entrust me with more. And I'm not talking only about money. Sure. He may never trust me with more money, but will He trust me with more of what really matters, the true riches which the parable speaks of later on in the text? That's what I'm interested in. That's where my heart lies these days. I prefer to be entrusted with more of the riches that are of eternal value and orientation versus, man, wealth is so fleeting. Money, I mean, we all work hard for money, and we spend it. It's gone. It's a lot easier to spend it than it is to make it. And I love watching my own children learn this terribly hard lesson. Kai recently had a breakdown with her car, and so she worked 2 hard weeks to earn this good paycheck, and it was basically gone with some unexpected expenses related to her car. And it was a great lesson for her. And just to watch the air go out of her sails and man, this is life. These unexpected, unplanned for expenses, they're brutal sometimes. And, preparing for those kinds of things requires discipline and a mindset. So that's the answer I'd offer. It's not real practical, but I think it starts there with just changing how you look at it.
Yeah, I think it goes back to your first answer too, of motivation and how you look at it, and are you motivated to get past it? For sure.
Well, I don't know. It's just, we can trust the Lord with it, or we have said in our home, we can give it to Him or He can take it from us. So we prefer, let's just understand it's His anyway. And we're better off giving it to Him, holding on to it loosely. That's a saying we also have in our house, that what God has given us, we realize we have to hold on to it loosely.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. And to move right along in verse 8 and 9, we see that the master's response, and which was that the master commends this dishonest manager for his shrewdness, his cleverness, and his cunning. And you make the point to state that there's not a redeemable character in this parable. All are unjust and corrupt, as you even said at the beginning of this podcast. And you go on to say that the unbelieving are more savvy in the ways of the world than the believing ways of God. And then we see in verse 9 that the unjust steward used his wealth to buy his earthly friends. And you make the point that Jesus uses him as an illustration to show the most corrupt are crafty enough to provide for themselves against coming hardship and evil. And you say we're to leverage what God has entrusted to us to advance the gospel. And I love that you even harped on it and the importance of us advancing the gospel and how we are held accountable for that. which transitioned into the final verses, which we see that when faithful in small things, we will most likely be faithful in the big things. So I know this is, again, probably a really easy question, but I think it's important because I think I look at so many in our world today, and something I think I struggle with a lot of times, we all do, is what does it look like to be faithful in the small things? You know, I think we just kind of go over that like, oh, yeah, we know what that means. But really, what does it look like to be faithful in the small things?
That's a good question. I suppose it's very personal and individualized. So for me, I think it's being faithful in the small things no one sees. No one sees. I'll just use a personal illustration. No one sees the time I put in studying for a sermon. But there's an accounting every Sunday morning for whether or not I have put the time in to study, to be well prepared before I step behind that sacred desk called the pulpit, to read the text, explain the text, and exhort the people with the text. Nobody has any idea how much time a pastor puts in studying. So I have to be faithful in those things no one sees, because that which everyone sees is the fruit and byproduct of that which no one sees, if that makes any sense at all. So I think all of us have to arrive at a place where we're comfortable being faithful in doing the things no one knows about, except Jesus. And there again, we get back to, I'm motivated by the fact that the Lord is watching my ministry, and that's concerning enough on the face of it, knowing I'm not always a great steward of my time, and I wish I was better at it. I'm trying to grow in that area like everyone, I would think and hope. But that's my response. It's just what does it look like to be faithful in the small things? It's being faithful in those occasions nobody sees. I mean, nobody sees you at home taking care of a sick child. Nobody knows the hours a mom spends up at night losing sleep, taking care of a child that doesn't feel good or is teething or has chicken pox. Right. Nobody knows the countless hours moms give in washing clothes, and nobody ever says thank you. And there's a lot of jobs people have that are thankless. Absolutely. And we just, we get up and soldier on. You're faithful in those small things, because it's the faithfulness in the small things that I think get you to where you want to be, with larger things that are more important but they're all stacked on top of the little things that we do.
That's good.
If that makes any sense.
No, it does.
Nobody sees the hours you study. You're a seminary student. One day you'll get the degree and we'll all celebrate it, but nobody knows the time and effort and hours and the late nights and stealing away time here to study and prepare for an exam, write a paper. I mean, nobody knows those things. But they appreciate when you have the diploma and what that represents, the work that you put into it to earn the degree. Sure. The small things. I think life is all about the small things. Absolutely. And then you have some dude writing a book saying, "Don't sweat the small stuff." I'm like, what? It's all small stuff. Sweat it all.
Absolutely.
But I get what he's saying, but
yeah,
that hasn't worked for me very well. I sweat everything. I sweat all the small stuff, because it's all the small stuff that matters most to me.
Absolutely. And if I may share a personal story, and as I ask this question and as you're going, and this is not by any means to point at me, look what I did, but I think it applies. When I was in college and a freshman in college, we had a church. We were going to a church, or I was going to a church, got plugged in, and they ended up opening up a new location in San Marcos. And the location they picked was in a bar, out of all places. And in that, the church had to be set up. Mm-hmm. At the time, I had no idea what I was doing. I volunteered. I would love to serve the church in this way. And looking back, I did that for all 4 years of college, so doing it for 4 years. And 2 years of it was volunteer, and 2 years of it I was getting paid, which was a blessing, and I appreciate God for that. But at the same time, in the moment, I didn't realize what God was doing and preparing in my own heart of yeah, it was a small thing in the sense of, yeah, this guy sets up chairs, he gets the the place ready, cleaned up. But after a while too, it was like, okay, there's got to be something else.
Mm-hmm.
And what I didn't realize was God was preparing me to see what goes on behind scenes to be prepared for ministry, that as ministry you're called to it all, not to one thing. And so I am thankful that God took me that route, and that even I had a heart that was able to serve. And it got hard a lot of times.
Sure.
And it was a lot of things I wish I was thanked for that I wasn't. But it had to come to a point where I had to be humbled, and God did it for me. And I'm saying all this to say that I think it's in those moments that when we are, we're questioning, why do we do this? Or we're questioning, I wish I was this person, is we have to be grateful for those moments, because we're given the opportunity to do that. We're able to serve the church, or serve, more importantly, Christ and what he's done for us in this way. And I think it's that mentality switch that matters.
Yeah.
Whereas, because it makes you grateful when you are given, entrusted with the big things, to be like, I know why I'm entrusted with this. It's because I was faithful in the
I think it's a perfect illustration, and a lot of us can identify with that. I was a lowly middle school intern at Pioneer Drive Baptist Church, making $40 a week, setting up chairs, putting water in water balloons. I can't even tell you. I'm ashamed to admit how many times I'm sitting there filling up water balloons. It took me hours to do, rubbing the skin off my fingers, not literally, but it hurt like that, and watching those kids, spoiled little brats, go through those water balloons in less than 2 minutes. Yep. I'm like, why am I doing this? Is this really ministry? But I learned a hard lesson that the Lord wants us to be faithful in those things that nobody likes doing, not very glamorous, completely for others. You get no benefit from it whatsoever at that time. And it's character building.
Absolutely.
And you can relate to, I served churches where I mowed the lawn. I cleaned out the bus barn, changed the spark plugs in the church van. I mean, faithful in the small things. Yeah. And who's to say they're all small things in the kingdom?
Just about to say. That's right.
Anyway, I appreciate what you said, because I can relate to that as well.
It's just, I think it takes we talk about raising children. It takes a village. I think it's the same concept in our faith. It takes a village, and it takes you to be humble enough to do the small things. Yeah. Because that's what Christ has called us to do. Yeah. So I'm saying all that.
If I could, I don't think our congregation appreciates the full impact, I hope she's listening, of what Crystal Todd does. Man, the church is so blessed by what she does in stealth mode. But what she does in stealth mode is so important to what we're doing on Sunday morning, and nobody knows she's doing it. But Christ knows.
That's right.
And her reward will be great. And I know we've talked about this before as a staff, how much we appreciate Crystal. I hope she's listening.
Yeah.
If not, maybe someone will tell her. She got a little shout out on the global podcast.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thousands of people.
Absolutely. In our minds.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, John, as always, what are some final thoughts? Give us some of your last famous words.
I don't know how famous they are, but this issue of stewardship is such an important one for the Christian. And, man, the sooner you kind of get a handle on this, I think the more you will enjoy life, the more you'll enjoy walking with Jesus, and the less wrapped up you'll get in the rat race that the world wants you to get in, having this, having that. It's all fleeting. And we don't get to take any of it with us. That old saying, you've never seen a U-Haul at a funeral. There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
So really we need to be investing ourselves in matters of eternity. Because like I mentioned this morning in Rut, it doesn't matter how many Super Bowl rings you have, how much global recognition you've acquired, records, nobody, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, we celebrate it, but what good does it do to have all that, and in the process of acquiring all that, you lose your soul, and you have no relationship with Christ? That's just, that's dumb, and it's really poor stewardship. So all of us really need to bump up against this and think sober in a sobering way about how do we want to steward this one and only life we've been given. That's my final thought.
That's good.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. And I don't know how we transition after that.
Yeah, well,
we're going to.
Yes.
I guess that's our transition. So now, John, everyone's favorite part. We know this is why you listen. That stupid segment. And it's not a football.
It's not football,
So.
although it should be.
It should, of course.
No, our stupid segment, or that stupid segment, maybe it is a stupid segment. Oxymoron. But, well, we want to speak to the issue of people, you need to stop wasting water.
Yes.
And give you a couple examples. Number one, this is so stupid, it just kills me whenever I see it. So I'm out running. It's pouring rain. I actually kind of enjoy running in the rain, and I never cease to be amazed at how many people are watering their yard while there's a downpour outside. That's stupid. The other thing that drives me crazy is people who stand at their bathroom sink while they're brushing their teeth and they're running the water. Stop doing that, people. That's why we're in stage 3 water conservation issues here in the city of Cleburne, according to what my associate pastor, Cody Kitchen, told me.
We're getting close. I didn't say we're in it.
Yeah,
We're
maybe. And that's why we're getting close, because people are running the water at the sink while they're brushing their teeth. You know, wet your toothbrush and toothpaste, turn the water off, brush your teeth, and then when you go to spit all that stuff out, I got a better idea. Just swallow it. Conserve water, people. Anyway, people who run their sprinklers while it's raining, what do you think of that, Cody?
I think it's pretty stupid.
It is stupid.
And I will say that my wife will probably call me out on this, that I've probably left the sink on a few more times than I should. Not all the time. Well, I also think that's stupid.
Stop running water while you're brushing your teeth.
That is stupid.
Or even worse, people who turn the shower on and then wander around their room getting their clothes out of their drawers while the water's running. And I know they're like, well, I'm waiting for the water to get hot.
Yes.
Not sure about the wisdom of that.
I don't know either. You know, another thing about yards and people watering, it goes a lot along with it, is I don't know why people are watering their yards every day when we're in a restriction still. When their yard is brown. There's no recovering. You can't get enough water on that thing.
I don't know, man. People crack me up.
But anyways, It is stupid.
Yeah, you can't fix stupid, but we should at least give it a shot.
They should just need to listen to our podcast.
Yeah.
The world would be better.
A lot of problems would be solved in the world if our podcast was more widely listened to.
Well, guys, as always, we enjoy this time, and we're so thankful that you joined us. And as we end the session, remember, make Christ known by what you say and how you live. Have a great week.
Good afternoon.
Thank you all for listening, and be sure to subscribe to Upon Further Review so you never miss an episode. If you have any questions, please be sure to reach out to us at info@fieldstreet.com. Thanks for tuning in.